Tashdile and welcome to Tibet This Week. This is Sakina Bhatt with another edition of Weekly News on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's look at the headlines first. 2019 Parliamentary Peace and Freedom Award conferred to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Budget session of the Tibetan Parliament begins. Situation in Tibet raised at the 40th UN session of UN Human Rights Council. Detained former Tibetan political prisoner secretly sentenced to 18 years. US Religious Freedom Ambassador urges China to resume dialogue with the Dalai Lama's envoys immediately. The US Secretary of the State asks the Nepal government to not let the Tibetan refugees return to a country where they can be subjected to persecution. Reverend Thomas Zinkula, Bishop of Davenport, Iowa, travelled over 7,200 miles to Dharamshala to present the Parliamentary Peace and Freedom Award to the Tibetan spiritual leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, earlier this month. The award is presented by the Davenport Catholic Interracial Council in collaboration with 11 religious organizations to honor an individual for the achievements in peace and justice not only in their country but in the world. The budget session for the financial year 2019 to 2020 of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile began on Tuesday this week. This is the 7th session of the 16th Tibetan Parliament. This year's budget session will witness presentation of the Central Tibetan Administration's annual budget proposal by Kanlu Karma Yeshi, Department of Finance, presentation of report by the Budget Estimate Committee of Tibetan Parliament on the consolidated budget proposal of the Finance Department and presentation of the 9th Public Accounts Committee. Inaugurating the first day session, Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, Pema Jungne, appealed to the 43 participating members to engage in a productive and fruitful discussion with the interest of the 6 million Tibetan people in heart. At the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council, several member states and international human rights organizations expressed concerns over unabated deteriorating human rights situation in Tibet on Saturday last week. Highlighting human rights situation that requires Council attention under Item 4, Australia, Czech Republic, Germany, France, Switzerland and UK expressed serious concern over human rights violation in region under China. On behalf of Society for Threatened Peoples, Office of Tibet's Geneva's UN Advocacy Officer Kande Tsomo said, the need for Council's attention on the situation in Tibet is more urgent than ever.
Since 2009, more than 153 Tibetans have self-immolated in protest against the denial of basic human rights in Tibet. Mr. President, this year also marks 30 years since the adoption of Convention on Rights of the Child. Realizing every child free from discrimination is a fundamental dimension of the Convention. Mr. Vice President, Tibetan children are ultimately paying the price. In addition to earlier reports of shutting down Tibetan private schools, in January this year, Human Rights Watch has obtained a document that bans Tibetan children from attending Tibetan language classes conducted by Tibetan monasteries. Parents of Tibetan children are forced to take pledge that they will keep their children away from Buddhist religious activities during their holiday breaks. Mr. Vice President, we would also like to note here that we continue to remain deep concern over an unresolved case of a 6-year-old boy then, Khentin Chögying Nyima, the 11th Panchen Lama of Tibet, who has been missing for now 24 years. Mr. Vice President, we call upon this Council to press China to uphold its commitment and respect the rights of Tibetan people. The Council needs to actively call upon China to enter into dialogue with the envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you.
During the session, several other international human rights organizations, including Helsinki Foundation, International Service for Human Rights, and International Federation for Human Rights, called upon Chinese authorities to respect the rights of the Tibetan people. News emerges from Tibet that Chinese authorities have secretly sentenced Lodro Gyatso, a former Tibetan political prisoner, to 18 years in prison while his wife has been given a 2-year prison term. On 28 January 2018, Lhotse Gyatso staged a peaceful solo protest in front of the Potala Palace in Lhasa, shouting slogans against the Chinese government. His wife Gurki was sentenced to 2 years for filming the short video just before his protest. In an official reaffirmation of the United States government's unstinting support for CTA's middle way approach, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Samuel Brownback, said the U.S. will continue to support the Dalai Lama's middle way approach and urged the People's Republic of China to resume formal dialogue with His Holiness and his representatives immediately. Ambassador Brownback made the remarks during a strategic visit to Taiwan for the 2019 Regional Religious Freedom Forum. He criticized China's occupation of Tibet, saying that it demonized and criminalized the Buddhist faith that lies in the core of Tibetan civilization. Earlier this month, French senator and a staunch supporter of Tibet, Jacqueline Eustache-Brinio, asked the French government to raise the issue of Tibet during Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to the country. Jacqueline draws the attention of the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs on the situation in Tibet on the 60th anniversary of the uprising in Lhasa. In preparation for the visit of the President Xi Jinping in France at the end of March, she wanted to know what actions the government intends to take to challenge the Chinese government in order to allow the Tibetan culture and language to foster in the People's Republic of China of borders in accordance with its constitution on ethnic minorities. European Parliament held a conference on re-education camps in China and persecution against minorities on Tuesday this week. Hosted by Member of European Parliament Thomas Mann, the conference featured 2 sections: a panel discussion on the situation in China and a second deliberation on what should be the response of the European Union. Introducing the conference, Thomas Mann spoke in detail about the situation in Tibet and the various activities and events organized by the Tibet Interest Group in the European Parliament. The U.S. Secretary of State asked the Nepal government to honor the principle of non-refoulement, a cornerstone of international refugee law whereby asylum seekers or refugees can't be forced back to return to a country where they can be subjected to persecution. According to a press release issued by the U.S. Embassy to Nepal, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrote a congratulatory letter to Nepal's Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli on completion of his first year in office. He further mentioned about the Tibetan refugees in Nepal and highlighted Nepal's reassurance to protect the rights of the Tibetans in Nepal, particularly the principle of non-refoulement. This is the end for this week's bulletin of Tibet This Week. See you next time and have a great weekend.